huge bouncy buttock.
Hello and welcome to the Google. No, Google sucks. Google is shit. Welcome to the Drunkduck QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 549. I'm at Ozone Ocean, and with me is Tance, Baines, and Pitt. Hello.
Hello.
And
Hello.
Hi.
this week we're talking about love stories, and we don't love Google at the moment, so we've fallen out of love with that. But we're going to talk about love stories in fiction, obviously, and in comics and movies and all those kind of things, and some of our favourite love stories. Maybe we can bring up examples here and there. But before we get into that, I've got to bring up the featured comic. The featured comic this week was Max Jaw. Definitely not a love story, and I'm going to tell you about that now. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Max Jaw. Max Jaw is a tough, relentless, cool, ruthless gangster. He hunts down his man and ends him, guaranteed, every time, with the help of his trusty cat. This beautifully stylized minimal comic with sparse text, evocative images, simple colors, and silhouettes. This is definitely a case of show and don't tell. It's a very arty comic and an arty story about the brutal life of Max Jaw. He seems to be a bit of a hitman, a bit of a gangster character. We don't know for sure because of the minimal text, so there's not a big bit of story build-up that's written out, and there's no prologues or anything like that. We just have to sort of analyze what we can from what we see. So what we see is what we get, and based on our past knowledge of these kind of things, of gangster stories and noir, detective things and all that, we just have to sort of piece together what was happening, and it seems to be some sort of gangster, mobster sort of thing, sort of 1920s, 1930s, people in fedora hats and all that stuff, very North American. And it's pretty cool. It looks gorgeous. It's just a really lovely looking comic, and Gummell's done the music to it this week, so you have a bit of a double whammy. Anyway, enjoy Max Jaw. And that was the featured comic, Max Jaw. Next up we have the featured music. Gummell has given us a theme to Max Jaw. Synchronicity. And it's fun. So yeah, Gummell basically looks at these fantastic comics that haven't been featured, and he sort of does these music, themes for them, and I notice them, and sometimes I feature them. So, and that happened in this situation. So, the Max Jaw, dark mean streets, sound echoes and roars in the dense, hard concrete jungle. It's unforgiving, raw and cynical. It knows all your secrets, and it doesn't even care. It's seen it all before. You're just another anonymous face in the crowd. You won't be remembered.
Ooh.
Theme to Max Jaw by And that was our feature. Thank you very much for that, Carlos. Our feature's music. So next up, we're going to talk about love stories on the Love Cast. Exciting and new. That was a TV series that was all about love stories. And
Yep.
it wasn't bad. Because it, it was basically full of
I
celebrities.
vaguely remember it. Yeah.
I used to watch that over and over.
Set on a ship, and it would be all these like guest stars. Like there'd be different people in every episode, right? And they're kind of whatever their love story happened to be. And then you'd have the crew of the ship, who was the sort of regular cast. You get to have these relationship stories come in. And
it was exactly like Deep Space Nine, except it was on an ocean line.
Exactly.
And
actually, I remember Patrick Stewart being on SM. Sorry, guys.
No, go on. What were you saying? You remember it being?
I remember Patrick Stewart being on Saturday Night Live in the late '90s. And he was Captain Picard, of course, Next Generation. And they did, one of the skits was Love Boat, The Next Generation. That crew on the Love Boat. It was very funny.
That's perfect, because he looks like that guy, too, from the Love Boat.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It'd be a good sci-fi. Yeah, actually, he does look like him. First, at the time, I remember, like, did he play Captain Stubing on Love Boat, too?
Oh, geez, yeah, they have a doctor and they have everything on there. But yeah, so love stories are a very popular genre, one of the most popular genres that has ever been. They've been around since before Romeo and Juliet, that tragic love story. Apparently, a general pattern. It was his favorite genre. Cowboy love stories was his favorite genre of story. So they're all over the place. Not too many love sci-fi stories, but it does pop up every now and again. Eros and Psyche, very lovely. But yeah,
great sci-fi couple.
It goes all the way back, to ancient Greece and beyond with the because they're universal. Because humanity is formed by sexual relationships. This is by not sexual relationships, but by sexual reproduction. So, and we're a social species, and we invented love, and so it's something that is universal to all human culture, and everybody can relate in some ways. So that's why it is so endemic to our media. It's all over the place. Is anyone really into any love story webcomics?
Not that I want to admit to.
I think Erin does one that's all about like a male harem or something.
Ooh. Yeah. Are you talking about Menagerie?
Yeah, that's the one.
I wouldn't call it a harem, a male harem. But it has a lot of love in it. It's pretty nice, actually, and very inventive. I really like it.
There you go.
But I'm not sure if it is a love comic, though. I don't think really. Like I wouldn't categorize it as a strictly like a love romance story, even though there is a lot of romance in it. But I think it's more of a finding yourself and who you are comic. Okay. For me, at least, as a
more of a drama then, love aspects.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it is a popular genre. I've done a few featured comics that have some good love plots. The name isn't coming to my mind at the moment, but there was a great comic I featured a while ago about vampires and things, and it had some all kinds of same-sex relationships and not same-sex relationships, and I think that was one of my favorite love stories.
The two kinds of relationships.
Well, if you think about, say, the harem relationships, that could be a polyamorous kind of situation, couldn't it? Usually they're not, but, on the...
A gateway one.
Yeah. There are. Actually, you'd wish, after watching a few of those stupid harem animes, you think, well, this would be better if they were poly, because it just gets annoying when the main character has to pick one main, a love interest, when you think it would be so much better for them just to have all the love interests.
The fantasy ending we were talking about on Patreon, or before we were on the air, maybe, I don't know. Like a lot of romance stories are fantasy, which it can be fine, but it's like that would be a version of that, or like the fantasy life, way more complicated to navigate in real life, I'm sure. But as a fantasy, why can't it be everybody? And can't we all just get along?
Yeah.
Like you go to a buffet and you don't want to just take one plate.
Exactly.
One time look at the buffet. You want to keep on going back up and get all sorts of different things.
Yes.
Or else, why are you going to a buffet for?
All you can love for $5.99.
Oh my gosh, babes! New song.
Modern idea of polyamory and all that kind of stuff, and being. I mean, obviously that idea is as old as the hills, and even. Was popular in the 1960s with free love, stuff like that. But that it always goes back and back and back. The 1920s it was popular, and then in the modern day we call it polyamory, and it's become more mainstream. So it'd be good to see that actually reflected in a proper love story. So be good.
I'll get on it.
Going for the one all the time. Which is great, but we've got so many of those. So go with the times. Come on. But okay, so a few of I don't know favorites, but I watched recently Pretty Woman once again, and it's been a long time since I saw that. And I mean that's problematic because it's about a guy who is having a relationship with a sex worker, and it's romanticizing it. And that's our idea of it now. And now we look at Pretty Woman and go, oh, that's stupid. That's silly, kind of like a wish fulfillment. But actually watching it again, it's not really that much wish fulfillment as you think. There are darker kind of hints in it, and it is a bit of it's a bit of a silly Cinderella kind of story. It is, but it's. But it's not as bad as you'd think that it was. So there are some things to be said for it.
I think probably with a lot of romance, I think a degree of wish fulfillment is the name of the game. When you're talking about stories that are purely romance surrounded, because romance in real life is, I don't know, I mean, it's messy and stuff like that, but it's there's a different headset to it. When you have a story that's purely around romance in the sense that A and B will or won't get together, that kind of thing, there needs to be a chemistry there that I think as a reader you need to hook up to. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out if wish fulfillment, though, is a necessary part of romance fiction.
I think wish fulfillment sort of sells it. That's what makes them, aspirational and wow, I really love this because, I can put myself into the role of this person. Like, say, Bridget Jones' Diary. I think that was another very popular love story, and that's of course has some sort of basis on these who did the Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice and all that kind of stuff. Who was that? It was don't care.
Yeah,
One of these famous British authors. But
we're all cultured.
Jane Austen.
I just want to say, just before you get into it, that so that Bridget Jones Diary is very much a modern wish fulfillment kind of love story, and it's got big problems because it idealizes these people, and it creates really silly archetypes that the main character can choose between, and but it is very much a wish fulfillment thing. It's a total fantasy, and people love to have, to put themselves in that role and imagine that they have this amazing rich millionaire that is an option for them, and then they have this super handsome boss character who's a bit of a bastard, and who's also a bit,
but in a good way always. I mean, never a bastard where it would count. It's just a bad boy.
Anyway, so go on, Tom, sorry.
No, I mean, I would only add to this in the sense that, most, I think all romance stories, like love stories and stuff, are explorations of a specific fantasy, either from the male perspective or the female perspective. And usually, I mean, like take Pride and Prejudice, which is typical to the point where we have so many modern movies that are reimaginings of Pride and Prejudice in one way or another. And I have to say that I do not look down on those because I like most of those. Although I really, I have a mixed, feeling situation going, love-hate, because I hate the connotations and the concept of what it entails, societally speaking, but I really am there for the whole being a foil to each other and challenging each other, and then, meeting someone that is not only physically handsome, but also is mentally and emotionally satisfactory to be around. But that's a fantasy, and people explore this fantasy in various ways. Or, for example, if you will take a romance story from the male perspective, which I'm not sure there are all that many stories of, but I guess you would have a woman or a situation or a love situation that would fulfill specific male wants.
Yeah, well, that's
or what they want to do.
Manic Pixie Dream Girl is one of those characters.
Okay.
It's obviously the a male not male created. I suppose it is. It's an archetype aimed at males, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, which is not aimed at females, obviously. But I mean, the popular idea is, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, that's a made-up thing, that's a male gaze, that's like a fantasy wish fulfillment. But I, in my life, have encountered many women who have kind of molded themselves on this idea that, they want to be a Manic Pixie Dream Girl. That is how they behave. That they want to sort of, project themselves as being a character like that because they find it ideal. It's so men will see characters in the media and they'll think, this is what people expect that I should be like. I'll be like this. So I will make myself the bad boy, or I will do, I'll mold myself into this. So people art reflects life and life reflects art. So things aren't always just a fictional stereotype.
But I think
we take it into ourselves. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's gone right out. I don't fucking know. Go on.
I'm sorry. It's yeah. So even though these things are made up, they're not necessarily just totally made up. You were sort of mentioning like male love stories. Let's see, there was one I watched a while ago, The Ghost of My Past Girlfriends. I think that's what it was called, starring Matthew McConaughey. So the idea.
Well, I was just going to say, sorry, I cut in because this was related to, I think, what I was going to say before. But, because after you mentioned, male love stories, I really tried to rack my brain to see what I could think of. And again, I keep on coming back to yaoi. But what that leads me to consider is that I think you're going to find a lot more variation. I know you're going to find a lot more variation amongst webcomics than you are in like mainstream, with the movies we bring up and stuff. We might be able to list a couple of movies that, could be a male love story, but you're going to find that all over webcomics, especially with how popular BL has gotten, boy love. Yeah, so I guess it kind of depends on what your main focus is media-wise.
Well, yeah, obviously in comics they don't have to sell themselves to producers and studios and things in order to get done, so they don't have to deal with, but men aren't interested in love stories, so we're not going to give you a budget to produce this. So, yeah, webcomic artists can do whatever they want, which is, that's a massive factor. Although, I mean, there are quite a few ones that I can think of that are more male-focused love stories, but they tend to be in the romantic comedy idea than deeper kind of dramatic love stories. So, yeah, there are quite a few.
You've got mail. That's a male love story.
You've got mail. Very good, Baines. Very good. That's actually interesting. So You've Got Mail was part of a trilogy of films, I think, with Meg Ryan
and
Tom Hanks. So they did You've Got Mail. They did Sleepless in Seattle. And, I don't know, Joe versus the Volcano. They did those three films together. And they're all different love stories, all different kind of aspects of the love story. With one of them, so I think You've Got Mail is the male-focused story, so that's told from the male perspective. Sleepless in Seattle is the female perspective, so that's told from the female perspective. And what was the other? Joe versus the Volcano is just a weird one where it's told from the male perspective, but it's just a bunch of different weird female like archetypes that he he gets involved with.
And doesn't Meg Ryan play like every female role in that movie? If I remember right,
it's like 3 different women, I think, 3 or 4.
She's like in disguise. Yeah, kind of fun.
It's so clever. So yeah, it's an interesting to look at that as a trilogy.
Well, I'd kind of like to see. Again, I'm sure this is going to be more of a thing in webcomics if it's not already. But like, since we're becoming more aware of like non-binary people and stuff, I'd love to see more stories about what their experience is with romance and, what they look for in it and stuff like that.
Okay. There are a lot of, I wouldn't say, the non-binary stuff is much newer, I suppose, to culture now, because people are still kind of fixated on either gay or straight. So that's basically what you get. though it is slowly starting to get some traction. So if you see like the popular comedy Schitt's Creek, have any of you seen that?
No.
It's quite funny. It's got who's in that Levi guy. Damn it.
Eugene Levy?
Yeah, Eugene Levy. That's it exactly. So that is that's a very, very funny kind of comedy about a family who are very wealthy, but then they lose all their money and they get stuck in some little town managing a hotel. But the son in the family is kind of very, very gay, in a kind of almost stereotypical way, but he's quite gay. But you get very surprised halfway through the show in that him and this female hotel clerk actually fall in love. It doesn't last that long, but he sort of explains it. He says, I never said I was just only interested in one gender. I never said I was just into the one thing. So yeah, that's an example of non-binary popping up in like the mainstream. And then he goes on to have a relationship with this I think it's like a business partner that he has for his shop, who is also a guy who starts off as a straight man, and then they have his gay relationship with this guy. So it's that's a good example of non-binary cropping up in the mainstream.
Well, that'd be more like bisexual, which is another thing that needs to be well represented. But
well, I mean, non-binary kind of in that his sexual preferences, I suppose. I mean, yeah, you could say bisexual, but what do you mean? Like it's someone who's trans?
Yeah, that whole thing. What was that?
Do you mean someone who's trans?
No, because that's still binary. Anything that's either male or female related. Because think of the word binary. Bi, two genders. Anything that's two gender based between male or female would fall under binary.
Fair enough.
Yeah, including transgender people.
Yeah. So what do you mean when you say a non-binary love story?
So there are 9 non-binary people who identify as non-binary, neither male or female. I'd be curious to see something romance-based from their perspective.
Okay.
So that isn't based on a male or female partner or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can look at the sort of
as either one.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I
Probably
think
wide open.
we've probably had hints of that in the past, actually. So that is it's quite an old thing, I think, because we've had the back specifically in the 1970s with the what was it? What did they call it then? There was a term for it, androgynous characters. So that was really big, especially in the late 60s and the 70s. So people who were just identified as like androgynous. So the gender wasn't a big part of who they were. You didn't know what gender they identified as, or even what they were sometimes. So, and there were a lot of stories with those kind of characters, like David Bowie kind of flirted with that for a bit. He was a very famous person. There are quite a few others in the old glam rock movement, as opposed to the glam metal, which came later. Glam rock did have like a big part of that, but yeah, you had that in sci-fi as well in the 70s. They showed the idea of androgynous and androgyny and love and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was I'm definitely sure you can find a few examples that I remember some of it. How about you guys? Did you ever come across the androgyny androgynous kind of love stories from the 70s?
No. I mean, I know what you mean by the musicians and stuff like that, and David Bowie's kind of thing, and a lot of them sort of had that kind of image or played with it or whatever, but don't know much about it.
Well, and also, like Terence put up before, like Eros and Psyche. So we've got, like, you know, the ancient Greek kind of examples of those kind of characters, but androgyny and I suppose non-binary kind of stuff was a factor in a lot of mythology too, because there were characters who were like both male and female, and there were characters who were neither. In, you know, many instances, characters that would you know, they would be very fluid in those kind of things. People bring up Loki as an example of this in Norse mythology, but that's a very poor example, because he specifically turned into a female horse in one myth to have sex with another horse to produce another horse. So yeah, that was that's one instance for that character. He was he had you know, identified as a male, and he had the male relationships with female giants and things, so it was pretty kind of standard for him. But yeah, but in I think Egyptian mythology as well, it pops up, and a lot of the other mythologies. So it is it does exist. Nothing is new under the sun. Even in the animal kingdom. But we're talking about actual love stories, I suppose. And yeah, in modern fiction, you don't really find that much of it. I suppose it is still a bit confusing to a lot of people, because they expect things to be, you know, either one or the other, I suppose, don't they? And they would find it, most people would find it hard to relate to it if they couldn't really, like, actually, one story that that I really love, it's a sci-fi story. I don't know whether I've told you guys about this one before. It was a sci-fi story by who's the writer? Tanith Lee. Tanith Lee was this writer who was always about the weird love stories, like all kinds of strange kind of love stories about demons falling in love and robots and stuff like this. But in this particular story, it's called Drinking Sapphire Wine and Don't Bite the Sun. And this is a story that's set in like the far future, where everyone lives in a state of perpetual youth because, you know, science allows that. And because everyone's in a state of perpetual youth, they're sort of, it's because the society is kind of managed by these robotic kind of creatures, they keep people in a state of perpetual youth because they're easier to manage in that way, and people are free to explore, you know, free love and all this kind of stuff, and as much as they want. But people are not stuck in one gender. They can change genders whenever they like. So gender is pretty irrelevant to them. It just doesn't matter, because you can be male or female, or you can be intersex or whatever, and so that doesn't matter what you were born as. It's just absolutely irrelevant. You can't tell what gender someone is at any stage. Like, you can't tell what they were born as, because they could be anything. You know, they could have gone through many genders, or they can just be like genderless. That's how it is in this society, which is rather interesting. So love isn't dependent on you know, what someone's genitals are. It's more dependent on personality or just, you know, interest. And so yeah, this is a story that is very much about that kind of stuff, and I would recommend it to people in the modern day. This was written back in the 70s. You know, again, based on sci-fi is based on like the trends of the time, sort of projected into the future. So androgyny was a big thing back then. You know, glam rock and all this kind of stuff was a big thing. So this is this has taken that and projected it into the future. But it also has a lot to lend to our modern day, in that, these people are kept in a state of perpetual youth. Their parents also have, this kind of like multiple relationships. Drug taking is kind of accepted in society, and people take drugs all the time. Life is very much about popularity and being popular with your peers by, having a little robot companion around with you, whoever is sort of projecting what you're doing at the moment and telling everybody what you're doing, and, like a Twitter feed, Instagram feed. So
that was prescient, or whatever the word is.
Yeah, very much so. She was very much ahead of her time, thinking in that kind of theory. And it comes down to being about a love story, which is a love story for our time, I would say. And it's also about, realizing your individuality and, in relation to your society, and not letting your society control you, and all those kind of things as well. So it's a good story for young adults to read, I would say.
Yeah. And it's the great thing about sci-fi, right? It can do things. Yeah. It can get away with things. Like the 70s, for heaven's sake. Like, wow. There you go. It's just a sci-fi.
More, forward than we give them credit for.
No? Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, probably true.
So what about
you? Know what?
Oh, Hans, go. Sorry.
No, I was just because I have been listening to all these variations, and maybe like this is a thought I have had. It's not something that I'm going to state as fact or that it is true or whatever. But it sounds to me a lot like the actual romance and the actual relationship is the same. It's just the wrapping that changes within stories, right? So you may have a hetero couple or a gay couple or a non-binary couple or a gender fluid or a genderless couple. But in the end, you are going to have the same tropes, in a sense, that fall into a very specific category. Looking for the one or for the ones, if you are going polyamory. And that's there is no, and I'm not saying that, I'm thinking that you basically get the same product just in a different box, which is fine. I'm not saying that this is bad. What I am sort of putting out there in order to explore is whether you could have stories that explore the relationship more than the demographic, let's say, like the parameters of who you are, which I know cannot be taken really out of the equation because it's completely different if you are a couple that society approves of versus being a couple that society disapproves of, or being a couple that your family disapproves of, even if society approves of it, and so on and so forth. Like I'm thinking, remember the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Yeah.
Which was pretty seminal in exploring that. I think that actually the couple itself was established. They had their romance going and it was awesome. And then they go to meet the parents, and that's where society comes in. And their own personal microcosm, which was the family, but also society in general. And I'm rambling because I don't have a point. I'm just saying that maybe there are some formulas that tend to be repetitive rather than explore more nuance in romance stories. And I don't know if that would make them romance after a while either. So all of that.
No, that's good. That's interesting. Yeah, and that's a good poll, that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Yeah, I actually haven't seen it, but I know of it. I don't know how it ends.
Highly
I'm
recommended.
sure it is, yeah.
It's got very
I know.
good actors, I think. Sidney
Sidney
Poitier,
Poitier.
Catherine
Yeah.
Hepburn, and can't remember the other two.
Yeah, I mean,
I know from writers like trying to get published in the romance genre, and romance has many subgenres and stuff like that.
mhm.
But I know it's like quite rigid with all the subgenres, and I don't know any of the ins and outs of that. But I know to qualify as a romance, there's a structure for a story to be a romance story technically, and not just kind of have elements of love and relationships in them. It's a pretty specific thing, right? Like sort of the feelings or the interest between the two people, and something's in the way.
Yeah, maybe
Whether it's like society
could be
or some kind of
Bottomless
science fiction
Waitress,
exactly, could be an apron that's in the way.
yeah.
Getting in the way.
Could be a
And
chef.
generally they get together,
Yeah.
but they're not ready. They're not mature enough, and they split up, and then they mature enough to get together, and in the end they're together. That's kind of the romance kind of structure, right?
It took me this long
Not
to
to-
realize that we do
Yeah.
a love story together, man.
Well, I don't know. I would call it. It's probably like the romance is B plot or like subplot. I don't think it's technically like a love story.
It-
We'll see what happens to everybody.
Specifically love story, but it is like the plots of the stories are quite focused
Oh, yeah.
on that. I mean, that's Nikki
Yeah, it's just
and
old, warmed over.
unrequited
sitcom.
loves. There's unrequited loves. Just all every single character has unrequited loves.
That's true.
Which, is part of the love story stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, but it's not specifically a love story. Although, is it? I don't know.
I mean, we'll see what happens. To me, like, yeah, that's a good question. I'm not totally sure.
Romantic comedy. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yeah, Pinky TA definitely isn't. Without Moonlight, definitely isn't. Brave Resistance, no. Inhabitants, perhaps. We will see. No spoilers. Maybe not. There's not enough pages yet for anyone to say about that. So, Putrid Meat does have...
Best love story that ever existed.
It's the greatest romance of all time.
It does have elements.
Mhm.
Yeah, it does.
It does have
Slightly.
a sort of love story in there.
It's not in any way integral to the main thing that's going on. It's just kind of part of the dressing, especially towards the end. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, that's what I like. That's my personal taste. Like when the subplot is a romance, I really like it. I
Yes.
in all my comics too. Like I like that stuff. But like with a romance as the A plot, it needs to have something else going on.
I think that's really hard to make work because I think again it just kind of comes back to chemistry. I think at the end of it all, you have to give a shit what happens to these characters, like in so many stories. But with romance, I mean, it's just so much part of caring about whether they get together in the end or not.
Mhm.
There could be a sci-fi story and I could still like the sci-fi without being super into the characters.
Mhm.
Again, it makes it harder if I'm not, but I could get into different things. But with romance, you kind of have to care about what happens to them, I think,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
well,
And
chemistry-wise.
now that you mention that's I think that's the key, the cornerstone or the
Mhm.
keystone. Take your architectural analogy.
Film molding.
But and that reminds me, and I'm going to bring up my Korean soft spot. for stories, because I have seen a ton of love stories where the love story is the A plot, but it is also the B plot, in the sense that it's not, you have the main love story which drives a good part of the plot, but in parallel you also have a different storyline that is also extremely important. So it's basically on par. You have A1 and A2 plots, in a sense, in the
And
series.
they're both romances, you're saying, or
No. It's one is a romance, is the romance of the story, like the main couple,
Mhm.
or could even have like C couples, D couples that are also in parallel. But the other is the undercurrent, the story, the other important story upon which the romance comes and is based on to develop. So, for example, one of the most popular, super popular stories in Korean in Korean drama, which is quite old right now, but still remains extremely popular, is a historical drama about this young woman who was born into basically the slave class, and she makes her way all the way to almost becoming empress. So this is the political part and how she does that, because she doesn't do that by slipping her way into the emperor's chambers. She does that by actually being an extremely capable person that just will not stay in her quote-unquote place. So you get to really like her and root for her because she's the underdog and she tries to do certain things, and she is not motivated by love, and she is not motivated by finding someone else. She just wants to make a life for herself in the way that she wants it to be. And then along comes the love interest, who also happens to be the king, of course, who is the one that falls for her first. And we get to see them develop as individuals and care for them both. And their love story intertwines with the whole political situation. And it is super exciting to watch for a person like me that isn't really much into romance. But the romance is so compelling because the characters are, as Pitface said, super compelling on the one hand, and they are not only interested, like their world does not revolve only around their own romance. It is part of their life, and that is what makes it attractive. And this is a formula that a lot of Korean romances follow, which is why I have consumed a lot of them. So,
all of them.
not all yet, but I'm getting there.
Well, we can't. What you were saying there about being such a great love story. You can't go any further without mentioning Princess Bride, which is everyone's favorite love story in the whole.
It's great.
It's freaking amazing.
And it's many things, but I would agree. Like that story doesn't exist without the love story. So I guess that would qualify it as a love story, probably, right?
Oh yeah,
it's essential.
But I'm there for Inigo Montoya, though, only.
Yeah, that's the kind of the secondary story, right?
Yeah,
I guess you could say.
I love it. The whole Inigo Montoya story. That's the revenge. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Ever since that, when that character is first introduced in the sword fight on top of the cliffs of despair or whatever those things are, you just fall for that immediately. That character.
Yeah, that's when you wake up.
Yeah, you do. that's when the story really becomes cool.
Yeah.
It's sort of sleepy, and it was deliberately cliched in the beginning with, like, as you wish, all that bullshit. And then, then suddenly when he gets to the top of the cliffs and has to fight Inigo Montoya, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then he has personality as well. When he was going as you wish, you don't really see any of him beyond the as you wish situation. And you don't really even understand why he's like, okay, it's probably because she's very pretty and she's the only girl he has ever seen. Like, why does everyone want her that much? There is nothing there. But then, pirates, Inigo Montoya. Perfect.
Exactly. And then it just gets better from there. Buttercup never has that much of a personality, unfortunately. But
she ends up being a little bit spicy, we see, because before she realizes who the bad pirate Roberts is, she's quite feisty.
Yeah.
She finally gets her own there, and she has demands of Prince Humperdinck.
Yeah.
And so she does in the end. She gets a lot better. But if we were going to write that again today, we would make it more equal, I would imagine.
I think so. But even in terms of I think it's cool because it's a love story within an adventure story. It's a love story that has spurred all of these interesting and cool things. Not cool, but I'm not a film student, but things of interest to happen, so we have lots to be invested in around them, and at the end, by the time they get together, it is quite satisfying because they've gone through all this shit.
Very heartwarming.
I think actually in a sense they don't earn each other in the beginning, but they do earn each other in the end, and that's why you like them together in the end.
Yeah.
So it kind of works. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. You definitely do. Yeah. In the beginning, you think, ho-hum, and then they sort of get together, and that's they're going through the swamps of whatever, the fire swamps. So there's more of a connection, and then when he gets captured and tortured and he dies, then you're thinking, oh my god, they have to be together. This has to happen.
I kind of love one of my favorite parts with the two of them, I think, which makes me start to root for them, is after they get out of the swamp, and she hates him, and she pushes him down the embankment. He goes, as you wish. And she goes, Wesley. She throws herself down as well.
Yes. Yeah.
I like the part where what's his name? I think it's Vizini tells us that iocane powder comes from Australia, and Australia is entirely populated by criminals. Yeah, we all know that, as we all know.
And you do a double take there, and you think, hang on, this is like a fantasy thing in the 16th. Oh, okay, it is total fantasy. Because it's settled until quite a bit after the time period of this thing. So, yeah. Then, you start expecting more modern references to crop up. But, yeah, it's absolutely hilarious. I love it.
I think, honestly... Sorry, I start rooting for her, liking her and paying attention to her as a character when she tries to constantly escape the ones that have kidnapped her, and she just jumps into the ship and almost gets eaten by those awesome singing elves. That's because she's not, she stops being this damsel character, is fighting, tooth and nail to just not be compliant. And I like that.
Yeah.
So
she has a will of her own. She's not just a silly damsel princess who's going to be just at the will of everyone else, at everyone's mercy. Oh, actually, we should wrap up because Google is telling us that we have to upgrade and buy the full version of this now, suddenly, after all this time.
We're not going to.
No, we're not.
F you, Google. All right, so thank you very much for listening to this QUACKCAST number 549. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.